The galaxy had grown used to silence when it came to Earth. The great empires of the stars did not speak of humans with respect or fear. They spoke of them as a fading echo, a primitive race that had once struggled through their small wars and fragile colonies, but had never risen to true greatness. To most alien rulers, humanity was nothing but a minor species at the edge of space, tolerated but unworthy of recognition. The Terran borders were marked on star maps, but no one gave them importance. The galaxy thought humans had no claws to strike with, no fire to burn with, and no vengeance to offer. That assumption was about to break. For years, alien merchants crossed close to Terran space. Some were cautious, remembering rumors of human stubbornness. Others were bold, mocking the warnings that surrounded Earth's territory. Those warnings were written not in treaties but in whispers, carved into the memory of other species who had once fought small wars against mankind. They told of battles that humans should have lost but never truly did. They told of soldiers who fought even when their cities burned, of survivors who rebuilt even when their world was ash. But time dulled memory, and the galaxy chose to believe humanity had grown weak, soft, unworthy of fear. Then came the intrusion. It began as a careless act, a violation that no one thought important. A powerful alien empire sent a fleet into Terran space. They claimed they sought only resources, a minor colony rich in metals and minerals. To them, it was nothing more than a forgotten outpost, defended by settlers with little strength. The empire expected silence, surrender, or at most a few desperate pleas. What they received instead was a message so cold, so sharp, that even the stars seemed to hold their breath. The humans did not beg. They did not scream. They simply said, "Remember us." That message carried across the stars. It was transmitted again and again by the dying colony. Each voice of each survivor recorded and sent outward. The words spread like a ghost through the networks of the galaxy. At first, the alien leaders laughed. They saw it as nothing, a final cry of a doomed world. Yet something about the words unsettled them. The calmness, the certainty, the promise that those who struck would not be forgotten. And in the silence that followed, a storm was beginning to form. On Earth itself, no leader needed to argue or plead for unity. Humanity had always fought with itself, but when the call came from the colony, all divisions vanished. Old rivalries crumbled, old wounds were set aside. Humanity gathered under one banner, not of conquest but of memory. They began to prepare not with loud threats but with quiet, unstoppable resolve. In hidden shipyards, ancient war machines were brought out of sleep. Factories that had been silent burned once more with light, forging weapons not for defense but for vengeance. Soldiers were trained, not with songs of glory but with the promise that every name from the fallen colony would be carried into battle. The galaxy did not notice at first. To them it was only the stirring of a minor world, a species too small to matter. They believed Earth's vengeance would be limited, that the humans would protest but eventually bend their heads as always. Yet deep in Terran space, something darker was awakening. Humanity was not preparing for a mere war. They were preparing a warning. They were sharpening a blade that would cut across the stars and leave behind a scar that no empire could ever heal. The silence grew heavy. Merchants who once passed near Earth now kept their distance. Explorers who once mocked human colonies began to turn away, whispering that something was changing. Even the alien empire that had struck the colony grew uneasy. They had won their prize, but they could not silence the words that haunted their minds. Remember us. No empire wanted to believe that such words could carry power, yet slowly unease spread. The stillness of Terran space no longer felt weak. It felt like the waiting of a predator, the silence before it lunged, and then the first Terran fleet moved. It was not large. It was not filled with the most advanced technology. Yet every ship carried scars. Every ship carried purpose. The humans did not announce their war. They did not send threats or demands. They simply left their borders and began their march. The galaxy did not yet understand what was coming, but the silence was breaking, and in that silence, vengeance was being born. The storm had not yet struck, but the shadows of its arrival spread through the stars. The galaxy had been wrong to forget humanity. They had been wrong to dismiss them, and soon every empire would learn that no silence is more dangerous than the silence before the storm. The colony that had spoken its last words into the void was no longer alive. The alien empire that struck it erased every settlement, every wall, every trace of its people. From orbit, the planet looked empty, stripped of its humanity, yet something invisible remained. The dead had left behind a memory, and memories were not so easily destroyed. The survivors who sent their message had not begged for rescue. They had planted a seed of vengeance that began to grow in every human heart across the galaxy. News of the massacre traveled back to Earth and the old colonies. It did not arrive with desperate voices or cries for help. It came with silence and with that single phrase repeated again and again. Remember us. The words were played in the halls of Terran governments, whispered in military stations and shared in hidden networks among ordinary people. No one argued about their meaning. No one tried to turn away. Humanity had always been divided, but now all divisions faded. They were not fighting for borders or politics. They were preparing to answer a wound that reached the very core of their identity. Factories that had been quiet since the last wars began to awaken. The skies of Earth turned red with fire as old industries roared back to life. Shipyards stretched beyond orbit, constructing vessels that were not meant to defend but to strike. Soldiers trained not for pride but for duty. They studied the names of the dead, memorizing them as though carrying each life into battle. For the first time in generations, humanity was not chasing progress or survival. It was chasing something colder, something sharper. It was chasing vengeance. The alien empire that had claimed the colony dismissed the danger. To them, humans were still a small species clinging to fragile worlds. They had more ships, more weapons, and centuries of dominance across dozens of sectors. They told themselves the humans could not challenge them. But deep inside, some of their leaders began to feel unease. Reports whispered of human fleets moving quietly through space, their numbers unknown, their purpose unreadable. The Empire tried to convince itself that this was only fear-talking, yet the fear spread like a sickness among them. Among ordinary aliens in neutral systems, the whispers grew louder. They remembered small wars where humans had refused to die even when the odds were impossible. They remembered mercenaries who fought until their last breath, traders who endured years of hardship, and settlers who rebuilt again and again after disasters. Now those same humans had lost not just a battle but an entire world. To the galaxy it seemed a small matter. To humanity it was a wound carved into their soul, and wounds like that demanded an answer. The galaxy began to notice small changes. Human ships no longer stayed close to their borders. They spread farther but not in loud fleets. They moved like shadows, slipping from one system to another, gathering resources, gathering allies, gathering silence. No songs of war announced them. No banners of conquest were raised. Only a quiet determination, colder than any threat. Other empires began to feel the weight of that silence. It was not the silence of fear or weakness. It was the silence of a predator waiting to strike. Inside human councils, decisions were made without hesitation. They would not beg for peace. They would not demand apologies. They would make the entire galaxy see what it meant to wound them. They were not fighting only for the colony that had fallen. They were fighting to etch a warning into the stars, a warning that would last for generations. Their vengeance would not be wild. It would be deliberate. It would be remembered. When the first human retaliation came, it was not against the Empire's strongest fleets. It was not against their capital. It was against a border outpost, a place the Empire thought unimportant. The human fleet arrived without announcement. They struck with precision, burning the station until nothing was left. Survivors whispered that the human ships carried marks of their dead, names carved into their hulls like scars. They left no prisoners. They left no message except silence. And then they vanished. The galaxy watched closely. Some called it madness, others called it justice. For the Empire, it was only the beginning of a nightmare. They tried to answer with larger fleets chasing shadows, but the humans did not fight fair. They struck where it hurt most, where pride blinded their enemy. Every time a station burned, every time an outpost fell, the humans whispered the same vow. Remember us. The words were no longer a plea. They were a warning. The Empire had believed it destroyed the colony, but the colony was not gone. It lived in every Terran soldier, every ship, every strike. It lived in the silence of their vengeance carried across the stars. And as the war began to grow, the galaxy realized something it had tried to forget. Humans were not special because of their strength. They were special because they could never let go. A broken world had given birth to something far more dangerous than conquest. It had given birth to vengeance, and vengeance was rising like a storm, slow, patient, unstoppable. The galaxy was beginning to understand that what had been broken would not stay broken. It would return sharper, harder, and more terrible than before. The world had been lost, but in its ashes humanity had found its purpose. And the galaxy would soon learn the cost. The galaxy did not understand what it had awakened. The alien empire that struck the Terran colony believed it had won a small and simple war. It had erased a settlement and claimed its resources. To them, the matter was finished. But to humanity, the story had only begun. Across Terran space, silence deepened. No leader shouted, no general boasted, no crowd cried for glory. Instead, there was a quiet gathering, a steady rise like the slow pull of a tide before it becomes a wave. Humanity was moving, and its movement was not for survival, it was for vengeance. The first Terran fleet that emerged beyond their borders was nothing like the galaxy had seen before. Their ships were not polished with pride or painted with bright colors of conquest. They were dark, scarred, each vessel carrying etched names of the dead. The humans had turned grief into steel, sorrow into fire. Every ship bore the memory of the colony, and every soldier who stepped into the void carried a purpose colder than any weapon. They were not fighting for expansion. They were not fighting for resources. They were fighting to make the galaxy remember. When the fleet struck, it did not announce itself. It appeared like a shadow across an alien star system. The outposts of the Empire believed they were safe, far from human borders. They were wrong. Human ships fell upon them with precision, striking with weapons designed not for intimidation but for finality. The outpost defenders had numbers, but they were scattered. The humans did not give them time to gather. They destroyed communication relays, crippled engines, and left wrecks drifting in silence. Survivors told stories of human ships moving like predators, cutting through defense lines with no hesitation. They said the humans never spoke, never demanded surrender, never paused. They simply struck and vanished. The alien empire answered with fury, sending larger fleets to hunt the Terrans. They expected a direct war, ships clashing in grand battles across the stars. But the humans did not meet them that way. They fought like ghosts, choosing when and where to strike. They attacked supply routes, burned fuel depots, and crippled mining colonies. Every time the Empire thought it had cornered them, the humans were gone. And yet in every place they struck, they left behind silence and wreckage. They left behind reminders that the colony was not forgotten. Other empires watched with growing unease. They had laughed when the humans first stirred. Now their laughter faded. Reports came from traders, mercenaries, and wandering fleets. The humans were no longer just defending their space. They were reaching across the galaxy, delivering punishment with cold precision. Some alien councils called it madness, others called it justice, but none could ignore it. A simple colony had been destroyed, and in answer, the humans had set the stars on fire. Among the humans themselves, the transformation was complete. Vengeance had become their uniting force. Once they had argued and fought among themselves, divided by politics, by history, by countless small disputes. But now those divisions were gone. The destruction of the colony had burned them away. The humans moved with one voice, one will, and that will was terrifying. It was not the will of expansion nor the hunger for power. It was the will to carve memory into the galaxy so deep that no one would ever forget. The alien empire tried to negotiate at last. They sent messages offering peace, compensation, and even territory. But the humans did not reply. Their silence was louder than any declaration. They did not want words. They wanted action. The Empire soon realized the truth. Humanity was not seeking victory. They were seeking vengeance, and vengeance did not bargain. The more the humans struck, the more the galaxy began to whisper. They called the Terrans shadows, ghosts, hunters of the stars. They said human fleets moved like storms, sudden and unstoppable, then gone before the skies cleared. They said their eyes burned with grief and fire, and that their silence was more frightening than any threat. Children of alien worlds grew up hearing the tale, and even they began to fear the humans they had never seen. The vengeance grew, and with it, the warning. The humans were teaching the galaxy a lesson, one act of fire at a time. They did not want to rule. They did not want to conquer. They wanted to make certain that no empire would ever again cross into Terran space without remembering what had been done. Each strike carved that message deeper. Each silence after the strike made it echo louder. And still, the humans were not finished. Their vengeance was only beginning. The galaxy had thought humanity weak, fragile, unworthy of fear. Now it was beginning to see the truth. Humanity was not special because of their strength or technology. They were special because they never forgot, because they turned memory into fire and sorrow into steel, and the awakening of their vengeance was a storm no empire could escape. The galaxy trembled in that realization. The humans had risen, and they would not stop until their warning was written into the very stars. The galaxy had grown restless. The alien empire that once mocked humanity now trembled in silence. Its fleets, vast and shining with centuries of power, were scattered like broken glass across the stars. Outposts once secure now drifted in ruin. Colonies that once laughed at human weakness now whispered of their wrath. The galaxy had not seen an enemy like this before. They were used to wars fought for conquest, for territory, for power. But humanity fought for something deeper. Humanity fought for memory. Every strike the Terrans delivered was not random. It was chosen with care. They struck at the edges of the empire, not to conquer but to remind. Entire mining colonies went dark overnight. Starbases that had stood for generations fell silent. Trade routes, once full of commerce, became graveyards of broken ships. And yet the humans never announced their victories. They never boasted, never raised banners, never demanded surrender. They left silence, and in that silence the galaxy began to hear the message. The Empire tried to rally support from other civilizations. They cried that the humans were unstable, dangerous, a threat to order. But the other empires remembered the words of the colony. Remember us. Those words now haunted everyone. They realized the humans were not trying to overthrow the galaxy. They were not trying to seize thrones or spread borders. They were carving a warning into existence. It was not only for the Empire that struck them. It was for all. Soon, stories spread faster than fleets could travel. Merchants carried whispers across neutral zones. Smugglers told tales in hidden bars. Children of alien worlds drew pictures of human warships, painting them as ghosts that stalked the stars. Entire species began to look at Terran space with unease, as though a shadow had grown there, a shadow none dared to cross. The silence of humanity had become a presence larger than armies. It was the silence of judgment. The alien empire at the center of it all was unraveling. Its people, once proud, began to question their leaders. Why had they attacked the humans? Why had they awakened something that could not be controlled? Riots broke out on their worlds as fear spread faster than news. Every destroyed outpost, every vanished fleet, became a reminder that their rulers had brought this storm upon them. Their soldiers no longer fought with confidence. Many abandoned their posts, whispering that fighting humans was hopeless, that death always followed, silent and sure. Humanity, meanwhile, advanced step by step, not in conquest, but in punishment. They left no path for the enemy to bargain, no door for peace. Each strike carried with it the same unspoken vow, you will remember us. The galaxy watched in horror as an empire that had once stood as a giant was reduced to ashes, not by endless armies, but by a single relentless will. At last, when the humans reached the empire's core, they did not march in to rule. They struck the capital world with precision. They burned its great fleets in orbit, tore its defenses apart, and shattered its pride. Then they left. They did not plant a flag. They did not seize territory. They left the world broken, humbled, and silent. The empire that had begun this war no longer existed. It had been erased not in glory but in shame. The galaxy now understood. Humanity had not fought for land. They had not fought for power. They had fought to create a scar so deep that no one would dare to repeat the mistake. Every empire, great and small, now carried the warning in their hearts. Terran space was no longer seen as weak or forgotten. It was seen as forbidden, sacred in its silence, guarded by a vengeance that would awaken if ever touched again. Across the stars, councils gathered to discuss the humans. Some wanted to ally with them, to avoid their wrath. Others wanted to wall them off, to pretend they did not exist. But none dared to provoke them again. Terran silence had become louder than any fleet, heavier than any weapon. It was the silence of a predator that had struck once and could strike again. The warning spread beyond words. It became part of the galaxy's culture, part of its fear. Traders told their children never to drift near Terran borders. Soldiers prayed never to see human ships on their radars. Rulers studied old human wars with unease, trying to understand the secret of their vengeance. But the truth was simple. Humanity did not conquer, because they did not need to. They only remembered, and memory was sharper than any blade. When the Terran fleets finally retreated back into their own space, the galaxy watched with both relief and dread. Relief that the storm had passed. Dread that it could return, for though the ships were gone, their silence remained. Every ruined world, every shattered fleet stood as proof of what happened when one dared to strike at humanity. And though the war had ended, the warning had only begun. From that day on, the galaxy spoke of Terran space not as territory, but as a graveyard no one dared to enter. Humanity had shown them something far greater than war. Humanity had shown them vengeance, and vengeance had written its lesson into the stars forever. The galaxy had seen many wars, but none like the one humanity unleashed. Empires had risen and fallen before, their battles loud, filled with speeches, banners, and songs of triumph. But when the Terrans ended their vengeance, there was no triumph, no celebration, no crown of victory. There was only silence. It was not the silence of defeat or surrender. It was the silence of a warning left behind, a silence that lived longer than any memory of fire. The alien empire that had started the storm no longer existed. Its proud fleets were drifting wrecks, its capital a broken shell, its colonies abandoned or scattered into dust. Yet humanity did not take its worlds. They did not enslave its people or raise their banners on conquered land. They left the ruins untouched, a scar visible to all, and in leaving it, they carved a message into the galaxy itself, a warning that could not be ignored. Other empires waited, fearing the humans would continue their march, fearing Terran fleets would spread from one empire to another, devouring everything in their path. But the fleets did not march. They returned home. They moved back into Terran space, carrying with them their scars and their silence. No messages were sent, no treaties offered.
Only silence.
And that silence weighed heavier than any words could. In neutral zones, traders and smugglers carried stories of what they had seen. They spoke of Terran ships that struck without hesitation, of soldiers who fought with eyes burning not with rage but with grief. They told of fleets that moved like shadows, appearing where least expected and vanishing into darkness. They told of an enemy that did not fight for gold or land or pride but for memory, and memory, they whispered, was the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. Generations began to grow up with those stories. Alien children played games where they pretended to be Terran ghosts, moving silently, striking fast and leaving nothing behind but silence. Parents warned their young never to wander near Terran borders. Even the bravest captains avoided those stars, charting longer routes rather than risk the shadow that lingered there. The galaxy had many forbidden zones, but none carried the same weight as Terran space. Inside Terran borders, life continued. The broken colony was mourned but remembered. New settlements were built and industries thrived, but the scars of vengeance were kept alive. Humanity did not celebrate its victory, because to them it was not a victory. It was a promise fulfilled, a debt repaid. The silence they carried was not emptiness. It was respect. Respect for the fallen, and respect for the warning they had left behind for all who might one day think of crossing them again. Leaders of other empires tried to study humanity. They sent spies, diplomats, and scholars, hoping to learn the secret of Terran power. But they found nothing unusual. Human ships were not the largest. Their technology was not the most advanced, their armies not the most numerous. What set them apart was something the others could not measure. It was their will, their ability to hold on to memory, to turn grief into unity and unity into vengeance. It was something that frightened every ruler who thought of testing them again. As the years passed, the silence became legend. Songs were written about the colony that spoke its last words, poems recited in hushed tones about fleets that carried scars instead of flags. Across alien worlds, the phrase "remember us" became a warning in itself. It was repeated not only in fear of humanity, but as a lesson. Never forget what loss can awaken. Never forget what silence can hide. The galaxy moved on as it always did, but it moved differently. Empires that once considered Terran space a weak and useless corner of the stars now marked it with heavy lines on their maps. They treated it not as territory but as a boundary that could never be crossed. They taught their explorers to avoid it, their merchants to bypass it, their fleets to steer clear of it. No one dared to test the silence again, and humanity? Humanity remained as it always was. They rebuilt, they expanded within their borders, and they lived their lives. But the storm they had unleashed was never forgotten. Not by them and not by the galaxy. They had shown everyone something more terrible than conquest. They had shown that a people who remember, who refuse to forgive, are more powerful than any empire that rules with fear or wealth. The silence after the storm became the most enduring legacy of humanity. It was not the fleets or the weapons that shaped the galaxy's memory. It was the fact that once a single colony had been destroyed, and in answer, an empire had been erased. The message was carved into the stars. Never awaken human vengeance. Never mistake their silence for weakness. For in that silence there lived a storm, waiting, watching, eternal.